friends. Uncle Marv here with another episode of the Unhealthy Podcast. Yeah, that's right. I said unhealthy podcast, but our goal is to help people live healthy and be happy. And that's in all areas of our life. It's not just about our diet, our weight, our exercises. It's a whole bunch of things, and that includes our mind, our soul. And today we are going to dive into one of those segments that I think when we talk about just being happy in general, it starts with our mindset. And I think I have somebody on who I met recently who's going to help us better understand. Dr. Carrie Johansson. Dr. Carrie, how are you?
Hi, Uncle Marv. It's so nice to be here. I'm doing great.
All right. So we met, what was it, a couple of months ago? Mm-hmm. And I was intrigued by your title because you have, not your official title, the unofficial title that says you are the sensible psychologist. Mm-hmm. So for our listeners out there, can you kind of help us understand what does that really mean?
Well, it's a little bit of a play on words. So on the one hand, it's about making sensible, proactive decisions about how you want your life to look. And it's also a play on the word of sense and sensation. And if we are paying attention to the sensations in our bodies, that actually helps give us information about what's going on in our brains. And again, it leads us back into making better choices and feeling better in the world.
All right. So kind of what I do with the Unhealthy Podcast in an effort to help us live healthy.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. All right. So your background now is as a psychologist. You're also, a speaker, author. You live out in the Denver area?
I do. I actually just got to go for a nice walk before we're supposed to get socked in with snow all weekend, which is awesome.
Oh, I don't enjoy snow.
I'm a skier, so I like it. So,
all right. Well, speaking of this, I heard on another show you had talked about last year doing 50 hikes in your 50th year. Mm-hmm. So since you mentioned that you're about to go out for a walk, are you still in the midst of doing those 50 hikes or is that completed?
So in the year that I turned 50, I did, my goal was to do 50 hikes. I got to 54 and I took a look at the mileage. And then in the last year, my mileage goal was 50, was not 50 hikes. It was a mileage goal instead. So I did 275 miles last year. And I made the silly mistake of basing this off of friends of mine who are runners. And I was like, 275 is going to be so easy, right? And it turns out that hiking miles are different than running miles. And a 12-mile run is a much easier thing to do than a 12-mile hike. So 275 was actually really challenging. So this year, my hiking partner and I, we just re-upped the 275 instead of pushing for more. So
I was going to say, hiking does sound a lot different than running. I was a runner in high school, so I understand running, usually on a flat surface, sometimes in an oval or to a park or whatever. But hiking involves hills and mountains and shrubbery.
And altitude out here.
Yes.
So the 275, so to make it on the list, it has to have some elevation gain, be at least 2.5 miles, and not be a paved trail. And I've gotten to go hiking everywhere from Africa. I got to go hiking in Africa last year, which was incredible, to like the beach in San Diego. That hike, the elevation gain is really dubious, but we call it a hike. So.
Okay. So I asked you that because I was going to ask you about it later, but a lot of times when we talk to people about getting healthy, and usually it starts with diet and exercise, that a lot of times people are like going to the gym. I retired from sports. I said no more gyms. Mm-hmm. And the wife and I started to do the walking.
Mm-hmm.
But then our schedules got off kilter. And I know that walking is one of the things that should be the easiest thing to do. So I imagine that hiking is something that could fall into that as well. Or is it?
And the cool thing about walking or hiking or running, I'm not a runner, but it gets you the trifecta, because oftentimes you're outside, you're moving your body, and it's one of the easiest ways to connect with other people. Like, one of the things that has been so fun about this hiking goal is that people come out of the woodwork to say, I want to do one of the hikes with you. And then you just adjust the hike to whatever their skill level is. And it's really fun. And so it's been super connective. And that has, and you're outside getting some sunshine, getting some vitamin D. Like, these are all things where if you can combine healthy behavior, it actually is fun. It isn't just a drag. I think a lot of times when people start thinking about, like, oh, I have to get healthy, it's almost like they associate it with being punished, right? And it's actually supposed to be really fun.
Which should be.
Yeah. And it can be, right? And that's the other piece. Like, it actually can be fun. And even sometimes doing something hard, like I was a competitive power lifter for a hot minute. And This was so fun. Yeah, I know. If you don't have video on this podcast, but if you saw me, you would not immediately think to yourself, oh yeah, competitive power lifter. But competitive powerlifting is divided by gender, age, and weight class. And if you're going to do well, right, as with anything, if you're going to do well, there's going to be some times where it's going to feel really hard. But that's actually one of the ways to get healthy, is to show yourself that you can do hard things and you do just fine, instead of approaching it like it's all punishment, which is, by the way, going to screw up the mindset and is going to totally decrease your motivation, and then you won't go back and continue it.
All right. I just made a note here that I want to do an entire episode later, if you'll oblige me, about this powerlifting thing. That sounds intriguing.
I would love to. It's a really cool story, because I was not an athlete, and it's a really fun story. I'd love to do a whole podcast.
All right. So I want to try to bring people into why I asked you to be a part of the show here. When I started this, it was going to be kind of like a personal journey and talk about how, I was going to get back into shape, lose my belly, and all those things. And of course, it's been up and down. And then the other part of that was to talk about this with other people, get some shared experiences, find out what works. I wasn't going to go join a gym. I wasn't going to go join a program. Yep. There are things that work for people that we can just share. And so That's kind of what I've been scoping out and about as I meet people. You are the owner of a program and an author of a book called Self-Help on the Go.
Yes.
So that, of course, intrigued me, because I'm like, all right, here we go. It didn't seem like your regular self-help type of deal. It wasn't about, it wasn't like, hey, wake up and feel good just because you said so. So let's go back and talk a little bit about that program, because that's not where you started in your therapy, was it?
No. So I've been a psychologist in private practice for 22 years. I specialize in treating anxiety and trauma. And 6 years ago, maybe, I started getting so curious about who got better and who didn't. And better is defined by someone saying, I feel better, I'm less anxious, I can manage the inevitable ups and downs of life with more ease, right? Like, that's sort of my underlying goal for everybody, is like, let's help you approach this life thing and feel better as it's going, even if it's not going perfectly. And Self-Help on the Go is the book my clients asked me to write, because they were really tired of feeling pathologized and like that there was something wrong with them. And I do think that the self-help industry in the United States, I can't really speak to internationally, But in the United States, we are telling people two things, both of which I think are a problem. The first is that you're broken and there's something wrong with you. And if you could fix it, then your life would be better. And the second is that at some point, if you just think or behave or manifest your way into a problem-free life, then you've got this all figured out and that's great. And both things are untrue. We are all works in progress. You're not broken. That's actually the subtitle of my book, because you're not broken, but life gets tricky sometimes. So number one, you're not broken, but do you have things to work on? Of course you do. You're human, just like everybody else. And number two, are you ever going to get to a problem-free life? Nope. So self-help on the go was, how do we navigate particularly common issues, right? Like somebody's being a jerk. You don't get what you want. You want one thing and something else is happening even when you're trying really hard. You have to have a tough conversation with someone. Those are all basic life experiences that we all feel pretty often. And so self-help on the go is all about the notion of try this. If that doesn't work, try that. But it's all based on this foundational premise that we need to manage and work with the life that we actually have while we're setting goals to get to the type of life that we want, instead of waiting until things are perfect to get started or berating yourself because you don't have a perfect life.
So a lot of what you just said, I'm trying to think back and remember how when I grew up, a lot of these things weren't necessarily problems. We didn't see ourselves as broken.
Correct. Yes.
But now we do. And
right.
The world is teaching kids today to, avoid
everything.
Everything, right. Parents are shielding their kids, putting them in bubbles, and, everything you do is special. That probably wasn't the right way to say it.
No, I think that's really the message that's getting given out, is not only everything you do is special, but you're so special that you can disregard your impact on other people. And we need to actually balance taking care of ourselves and also interacting in a community, because we are actually a tribal species and we live in communities.
So the subtitle is actually one of the things I wanted to hit on. It's perfect. The fact that you're not broken. Mm-hmm. Because there does seem to be this thing where if we are not 100%, then there's something wrong.
Yeah.
And it's almost sad in the sense that who you are is who you are. There's no percentage, right? Yeah. There's not a prototype that we're all out there trying to be. Otherwise we'd just be this, mononucleatic society where everybody's the same.
Yeah, I think it'd be really boring.
Yeah.
So getting back to that curiosity of what's important to you, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what do you like to do? Like, we used to approach things from a lot more curiosity, and frankly, things were more fun. I use the word fun a lot because I feel like one of the foundational principles that I function from is we're here to enjoy this. Right? Yes, life has a lot of ups and downs. Suffering is inevitable. But enjoyment should also be inevitable. And if we can systematically set ourselves up for that, that's really awesome.
So I just got lost because I'm sitting here thinking that a lot of what we focus on is almost like an afterthought. Because if we can focus on what you're talking about, first of all, realizing we're not broken, mm-hmm. realizing that, life is fun. Mm-hmm. We should almost be okay with who and where we are. I mean, as long as we're not, breaking things.
You shouldn't be, as I used to say when I was raising my daughter, the number one rule in my house was don't be a jerk on purpose.
Right.
Right? Let's be thoughtful.
Yeah. Don't hurt other people.
Yeah.
With intention. that sort of thing.
And understanding, this is one of the things that's so interesting, is particularly in our culture right now, it's a very threatening question to ask what someone's strengths and weaknesses are. And asking ourselves what our strengths and weaknesses are also feels like a threat because, again, we've been taught that if we have a weakness, that there's something wrong and we should eliminate it. But actually, we all have a different sort of scatter plot of strengths and weaknesses. And the more information you have about what your tendencies are, what are your tendencies that move you in a good direction, and what are the tendencies that are going to trip you up, that you're probably going to have to fight over and over and over again, right? I have a tendency that I really like in myself to be friendly, right? This is a tendency I enjoy. It's a tendency that I lean on and I really like it, right? This is something I like about myself. At the same time, I have a tendency to procrastinate, right? I was the most annoying student when I was living with roommates because I would start my papers at like 10 o'clock at night. They're like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know, like I have to get to my paper, right? But I had 4 weeks to get to my paper and then I started way too late, right? So these are tendencies that I've had a very long time. One of them I really enjoy about myself. One of them I'm like, oh, this again? And the answer is, yeah, this again, right? So knowing who you are and being able to say out loud, what are your strengths and when are they strengths? What are your strengths and when can they be weaknesses? What are your tendencies that don't tend to be the best behavior? And how can you corral that a little bit? And just understanding that you're going to sort of be corralling yourself permanently. Like every now and again, we have a habit and we can break a habit.
Right.
But the tendencies are something that are a little bit deeper. It's more hardwired. And so it's going to be something that we have to work around probably the whole time. And that's okay.
Now, your book focuses on, what is it, 99
tips. Yep.
So let me go back and ask this first, just to get an idea of what happened before you wrote the book. So can I ask the types of trauma people that you were dealing with? Are we talking about like real trauma, accidents, events? Are we talking about grief? Are we talking about...
My specialty for a very long time was sexual assault and sexual abuse.
Okay.
I've also done a fair amount of work with folks. So that's obviously a big trauma, oftentimes over a long period of time. Sometimes it would be a single incident, which is fancy for saying something happened one time. I did a lot of work with sexual abuse trauma. And then also I would do work with things like somebody got into a terrible car accident and then they're afraid to drive. I've worked with multiple people who've gotten into plane crashes and then they're afraid to fly. So sometimes someone will have one big bad thing that's happened to them that then sort of permeates, it trickles through their life. Other times someone's, like for some of my folks with sexual trauma, they would have had multiple very abusive relationships, right? And so trying to just very much put back together a different way of approaching the world so that they weren't continuing to get victimized and also they weren't continuing to feel just threatened just walking down the street kind of thing. Okay.
So trauma around fear, when you are afraid to do things because of a trauma event, self-esteem, relationships. We have had some other shows that talk about relationships, but from a coupling standpoint of, getting partners and stuff. But I could see that that's trying to reestablish almost a self-worth. Does that make sense?
A lot of that. Absolutely. Okay. And self-worth, and then also trust in yourself. So particularly when folks have been in really difficult situations and they have been actively mistreated by other people, it gets really hard to discern who can you trust and how do you trust yourself and your own judgment, your own decisions. And so helping people get back to understanding who they are. And again, that strengths and weaknesses thing, right? Like where are they coming forward in the world from a position of strength, and where is there something that they maybe need to work around?
Okay. So I'm going to make a note here that I'm asking you questions and I haven't yet received the book.
It was so funny because I was sitting here and I was thinking to myself, I don't know that I sent Marv a book. I need to send Marv a book.
I don't know if you were going to send me one. I have the Amazon link, and we got so busy with planning our session. I just went to PodFest. Got a little sick afterwards, so I was like, I'm not 100% prepared. So I wanted to let you know that we're definitely going to have to revisit this. But the reason I was asking that is because I wanted to get an idea, because part of where I was thinking that self-help gets a lot of attention is people that, maybe have a poor self-image around their body, around their weight, around their food and diet, their image. I know that people that self-mutilate, I guess is a word that happens, where they're either putting in as many piercings and body things and tattoos and stuff like that. There's an image thing that happens there that I was wondering if those were the type of people that you also had been working with.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, kind of the underlying encouragement that I give to people, and also personally try to apply for myself in my own life, is it's okay to not be perfect. And the sooner you can accept who you really are and what your strengths and weaknesses are, the sooner you can actually decide, like, hey, actually, I do want to make a change about that. But I think a lot of times what people do, especially if we just take body image, right? Let's say you're running 50 pounds overweight, right? And it feels terrible, and you're really hard on yourself, especially if something's coming up like a beach vacation or something like that, right? Where you're supposed to get into a bathing suit. It's interesting because it's going to take you farther and farther away from getting to your ideal weight, the harder and more awful you are to yourself about being 50 pounds over. And so getting into acceptance. Now, acceptance is not the same as approval. Acceptance is not saying, I like this. Acceptance is saying, here's what is. Here's what is. I'm 50 pounds over. I'm going on a beach vacation. I don't like bathing suits. Okay. That doesn't mean that you then go and starve yourself and then rebound, right? It doesn't mean that you decide that everything's hopeless and cancel your beach vacation. Both of those are being out of acceptance, right? You're fighting with yourself and you're fighting with reality. And if you can actually slow down and get into acceptance with what is real, even if you don't like it, that's actually the first step to being able to decide, what do I want to do about this? Is there something I want to do about it? Because it's actually okay sometimes to say, like, here's where I'm at. I don't like it very much, and I'm not going to do anything about it right now. Okay. That's one of your choices. It's one of your options. Now, I will always encourage folks, right? Like, forward movement is kind of one of my main encouragements to folks, is like, hey, let's move forward and let's enjoy our lives. But if you don't want to, you don't have to, you can choose. But so getting into conscious choice, because you've accepted and acknowledged what's really going on, oh my gosh, it gives you so much more power.
I'm smiling because I feel like you've just called me out, even though it's not 50 pounds, but it was my belly, which I thought if I would lose 10 to 15 pounds, the belly would go away and all would be well. And that did not happen.
Uh-oh.
I mean, I think I lost 12 pounds, but the belly was still there. But I did it to where it was based on an event. And then once the event was over, well, the belly and the weight is back.
Right.
So now I've got to reshift. And that whole thought process you talked about, well, this is
What's
it.
So?
This is
Yeah,
it.
what's real?
So interesting. All right. So we went, we took a left turn there. I wasn't planning on going down, but I'm glad we did. Helps me get a little bit better grasp on what you and I can chat about. I'm hoping we could talk some more, and I'm thinking that I'd like to do a break here and
Great.
do a part 2 to this first session that we did, kind of regroup and get back on track, and then figure out some stuff we can talk about down the road. I have a feeling I'm going to ask you questions that are going to take longer to answer than you were anticipating.
That sounds wonderful. I love big, long conversations.
Okay. All right. So Carrie Johansson, Dr. Carrie, and Self-Help on the Go. I'm going to have a link to the book in the show notes if you guys want to get that and follow along. And I'll have, let's see, what other links can we share? We'll figure it out. We'll put them all in the show notes. But folks, join us again for part 2 of my first conversation with Dr. Carrie.
Thanks, Marv.
We'll see you soon.